All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Mark Saltzman. He's a playwright. He's got a new show, Alice, formerly of Wonderland, a musical story of the real Alice. Now, this is somebody I'm excited to talk to. He's right on brand. His play has made its world debut in Santa Barbara at the New Vic Theater. He's also a television writer. He's written for Sesame Street. He wrote a movie, Mrs. Claus, which I want to talk to him about. And it turns out that he just lives down the street, that we're neighbors. Mark, neighbor, welcome to the show.
Hello to you, Frank. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Where are you sitting? What part of, are you in LA, I'm assuming?
Yeah, Studio City on a classic cloudy California day.
Well, thanks for being on the show. I was delighted to come across your play, your musical, somebody else who's been inspired by Alice. And so I'm really curious, why do you think Alice has lasted so long and continues to be reinvented, and we find ways to use her to tell stories in 2024?
Oh, I have given that a lot of thought. One thing, there's a uniqueness about the original books that nothing's really eclipsed. There's a looseness and a irrationality and an unstructuredness to the original books. And I think that could only be from Dodge and Reverend Dodgson, Lewis Carroll's intimate knowledge of logic made him able to avoid logic. He knew where it would fall. And most children's stories have a moral and have a very clear narrative and sort of beginning, middle, and end. And a heroine or a hero who's somehow flawed and learns a lesson or something like this. And Alice defies all of that. And I think it's because of that uniqueness that nothing else has ever come along since 150 years ago that qualifies in the same way or entices kids when they first read it, because it's first kids. And also one of the reasons I think that, as you say, Alice is inspired, but really, where is the adaptation of Alice in Wonderland that truly, truly succeeds? The way, the adaptation of The Wizard of Oz absolutely supersedes the original. But from stage productions and Disney and Tim Burton, who just avoided throughout the whole story completely, nobody's been able to really wrap their arms around this elusive, mysterious piece of work by Lewis Carroll.
Well, that's a really interesting take, because you could never teach writing using that book, because there is no beginning, middle, and end. You could never write a TV show, a movie, because it's so, episodic and there is a randomness to it. But thematically, it's really interesting and really strong, because it's always about, who am I? In that sense. But well, first of all, can you just tell us the concept behind the play? Because it's Alice, formerly of Wonderland, a musical story of the real Alice. And the real Alice inspired Lewis Carroll and met Prince Leopold, which is factual. And so you went from there and did this show, which I'm assuming is some sort of romance, correct?
It is a romance, yeah, because that much is factual. We know there was some sort of relationship, presumably romantic, between Leopold and Alice, and it seemed to have been not chronicled as far as all the Alice Works. Somehow that was missed. And I just love this idea because for one thing, you knew going in that this did not work out,
Right.
in the Victorian era. If there was romance, it was not going to end skipping down the aisle to be married. So what did happen? I wondered. And when you're writing this kind of historical fiction, you want to always be plausible and factual as much as you can. And from what I learned from my research, from going to Oxford, talking to a Lewis Carroll expert there, it seemed they did get together. There was proof that they had a punting trip together up the Thames, which echoed the original boat trip, the Alice in Wonderland boat trip. That's kind of interesting. That in that scene, I figured, well, Alice would certainly reflect on that. When 10 years earlier she took this boat ride with an Oxford Don, within those 10 years she became, this famous figure as the muse for the Alice in Wonderland books. And now here she is back on the boat with the prince. Well, it also made me think, who is this young woman who thinks she was worthy of a prince? All she is a, Oxford professor's daughter.
Right.
And for all we know, never had been to London. Who knows, and that, as I started thinking about her character, I thought, well, being this beautiful young woman, and she was beautiful, if you see the pictures, one of the few young women in an all-boys school, daughter of a professor, and remember those professor kids at college.
Right, especially 1870s.
Or, any day
Yeah.
there's a profile to them. And I thought, well, this doesn't give you the impression of a modest, humble young lady, all those things lined up. And well, that would be a fun character to write. Who wants to write nice characters, right? And then I started looking at Leopold the same way. Well, what could he have been like? Here's a Prince Royal, and he wants to go to Oxford. That he wants to be educated. Well, there's an admirable character. That's not like the Playboy Prince or the just sort of vacuous Euro Royal.
Right.
So they seem like they really would be interested in each other, attracted to each other. And then, well, what would destroy this? Well, of course, Victorian society, not to mention mom.
Yes. She had a little bit of power back then.
She did, and she didn't seem to use it for good very often, did she?
Indeed, she did not.
That was a sort of surprise in the research. That, I don't know, the beloved Queen Victoria, as England was going more and more woke, and Oxford was trying to, redo their past and take down statues of Cecil Rhodes and, benefactors whose morals were dim. Queen Victoria remained untouched, uncriticized, and here she is, the epitome of imperialism, right? I mean, who represents it more? And I asked an English friend, why does she get a free pass? Why is there no criticism? Why aren't they taking down statues and renaming streets? And he said, well, she's Queen Victoria. Yep. Pretty much.
Yeah. I got a little criticism for kind of portraying her as a baddie, sort of along the lines of Red, as if they were doppelgangers. And people were like, well, we really love our Queen Victoria, so you're going to rub some people the wrong way.
One of the things, we're going off here. I could see loving Prince Albert. The more I read about him and his policies, and much more progressive. And you wonder if he had lived, if history would have been different. 20th century history, that his social issues. He was kind of skeptical of the future of colonialism. And, you think Charles Dickens is writing here, in this era. How much more blatant can the social illness of England be than in Dickens?
Right.
And did she open a book? Did somebody mention workhouses and child labor to her?
Yeah.
It seemed like all England was aware of it because of Dickens and others, but mostly Dickens. People were so riveted to his work, other than Her Majesty, that
Yeah.
it's hard to even picture those two in the same room.
No, it's really true. I did quite a bit of research and came to the same conclusion. They're really giving her a pass.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is
Yeah.
amazing.
So you have a scene on the River Thames with Leopold and Alice.
Yeah. And that's maybe the one scene I can say is absolutely factual, that they did take that boat trip. Again.
And also, that's very romantic.
Isn't it just?
Yeah, it's so romantic and it's very intimate. And back then, just being that close to each other and just two people.
Yeah. And,
so,
well, what do they talk about? That's what comes down to us writers.
Yeah.
And once again, you want to make it plausible and, it's still a little surprising. I imagine she would have spoken about the golden afternoon being on the river with him. And I imagine he would have asked and said, what was that like that day? And she remembered, of course.
did they did they in this scene or in the play, do they have a perspective on the books? I know she's famous because of the book, but does Leopold have a take on it that might reflect your take on Alice in Wonderland?
Her take is she loves what it did for her. She loves the fame and she loves the social position. Her dad does not. Too much attention on the young lady, and it's gone to her head. I have Leopold. He's so enchanted with Alice herself. He wants to know if the girl in the book is like Alice as a girl.
Oh,
it's more about the young woman than the literature, but that gets him curious. And she says, really not at all. She says this girl is in a strange and dangerous land, and she never thinks about her family, or her sister, or her parents. She doesn't even miss them. If that happened to me, I'd just be distraught. And, she'd be Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz.
right.
Just get me home, get me home. This doesn't cross Alice's mind, it seems. What's going on at home. She certainly does. When she cries, it's not because of homesickness.
Right.
And even that, it's a strange emotionality about that girl in the book. And it's another reason why it's sort of unadaptable, because this central character who's essentially passive, I am a camera, she's just sort of taking it in and not really motivated to get from one place. And Through the Looking Glass, of course, there's a mission, but in Alice in Wonderland, the original, she's wandering really,
Right.
Getting from one spot to the next and happens to make it home, but is in no real rush,
Right.
to get there. She seems happy to be away from her family. And Leopold says, must have had a mother like me. So that's kind of their exchange. He's also a little interested in Dodgson, what he was like. And one of the things about him, I mentioned, it's not a big thing, and maybe you found it. He seems to have been quite the entrepreneur, right?
Right.
With the Alice books.
Yeah, but way ahead of his time in terms of, being in control of everything, really picking the artist, picking the print style, even the font, as I remember.
And the stage productions and the knickknacks, the merch.
Yeah, the merch. I think he might have been first in line of coming up with merch for a book.
And how come we don't talk about him the way we talk about Walt Disney or any other like entertainment industry titans? We like to put him in a garret and have him lonely and, writing.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Frank Baum, we all know his story.
Yeah, yeah.
Charles Dodgson is,
Maybe the wealthiest Don teaching at Oxford. They
I
don't
mean,
get paid a lot.
there's all that controversy. It's also fascinating. The controversy is around the photographs that he took of young girls.
Yeah.
But the fact that he was into photography so early, one of the first, and he was very ahead of his time in a lot of ways. But I think he was never married. He seemed to, even though he's entrepreneurial, he didn't seem to go out of his way to promote himself, even though he wrote endless letters to all of his friends.
But he did go out of his way, not himself, but Lewis Carroll.
Well, Lewis Carroll, right,
Yeah,
right.
it was promoted to the skies.
Yeah.
And the characters were on, plates and tea towels, and there was always an Alice show somewhere. Not to mention, that's a sequel through the Looking Glass, it's an actual sequel. But you never, what did he do with his money?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And why don't we know that? I feel like there's some English, sort of, well, that's not discussed, some social taboo around this, whereby you can discuss, well, what was going on with little Alice, that's discussable, or, nonstop discussable.
Well, that's in retrospect, though. I think that was, 60s, long after he had, died. But to your point, I don't understand why Charles Dodgson is not recognizable, and you have to say Lewis Carroll right afterwards. That does also surprise me. But to my point, I think it wasn't done. You didn't promote your name. It was easier to promote.
Right.
He didn't want any recognition. That's why he had that name. Came up with a bunch of ideas, and I think it was it's an anagram.
All that.
It's creating space between him and the work.
Right. But, you can be pretty sure the bank accounts were in the name of Charles Dodgson. But that's what makes me curious and curiouser, that there hasn't been this kind of, in my research and yours, and we've both done plenty, it's just ignored, this aspect of him, and it's like writing about Walt Disney and saying, well, he was an animator, look at how beautifully he drew, and that's the end of it, and missing the whole point of building an empire. And the Alice empire is still with us. The Dodgson estate isn't making anything off it, but if in just as a thought experiment, if you think, how much, if Alice was in public domain, how much would that be taking in a year? The Alice projects around the world. If I had to license, or you had to license, it would be millions and millions.
Well, it would be probably, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. But of course, it wouldn't have been so successful if it hadn't been in the public domain. And it wouldn't have been successful because it was so episodic. And so once it was in the public domain, then you're just riffing off of it. But I also think that a lot of people can see what they want to see, because some people see it as a fairy tale as it's described. Yeah. Some people see it as a horror story, growing taller and smaller, and think it's completely terrifying. It also is, I think, was written for adults on some level, in terms of the satire. And we didn't have, children's, middle grade, young adult. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
just, they didn't have all those categories. So,
Yes, it's true. The satire and the references, even the local Oxford references that really, I mean, that's where you see this really wasn't meant for a huge popular reading public. It was meant for these little girls, the little families,
yeah.
and um, and it was going to be filled with, well, that shop on Oxford High Street, and I've I've heard the Mad Hatter. That face belonged to somebody at Oxford.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Not a hatter, but it
No,
just
no, yeah, a friend or an acquaintance or a little bit of an enemy. I can't remember. It
yeah,
was,
yeah,
it
but
was
a recognizable
yeah.
presence because with that face, how could you not be? So a lot of little Oxford in jokes that I try to follow a little bit.
So the show is currently in San Diego. I mean, in Santa Barbara,
Santa
correct?
Barbara, yeah, yeah.
And but it originated in Wyoming.
Oh, there used to be a Wyoming theater festival that I was affiliated with, and when it was kind of in the workshop stage, I brought it there just to put it in front of an audience and see what I had. And it was, yeah, it was a very skeletal version, but I just sort of needed it because the musical element is a cappella singing because Leopold was musical and joined music groups at Oxford, and I love music theater. Well, how am I going to make this musical? I didn't want to do a traditional musical. It would seem like just another Alice musical, and uh, so I thought, oh, well, I can use the kind of Oxford Glee Club as a musical motif through it. And Leopold would sing with them. And I used some traditional British folk songs, Victorian parlor songs. I wrote a couple of new ones. And, standard Oxford songs that I could find, historical Oxford songs. And, with 6 actors, it wasn't easy to get that big Glee Club sound, but our music arranger, Jack Lipson, so brilliant, he managed to make that sound like a big chorus, and we were very pleased with the musical sound of it, and that people consider it a musical, even though it's a very odd, unorthodox kind of musical. But
Well, the Glee Club, that's a great idea, and I didn't
yeah,
realize Leopold was in the Glee Club.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
just a natural, and using music of the time that seems appropriate. Plus, you don't have to deal with the rights, right? The
Correct, right. It
so
was using the public domain songs and my own. So it was that because you probably know music licensing is just one of the most unbearable aspects of making this art.
Right. Well, would you just explain to the listeners when you say you're putting your show up at Wyoming?
Yeah.
But it's public, so people are coming to see it, but it's rough, and that's why you go to a festival or a small local theater will put something up so you can run through it. I mean, what is that? What's for the audience versus what I know? I guess for you, it's to see how it works. For
Yeah.
the audience, do they kind of participate? Do they give notes at the end? If
Yeah, generally you have a talk back at the
okay,
end and you find out what the audience thinks. But I found that at that point, at the end of the show, I already know from the audience reactions what needs figured. If there's a joke and the audience doesn't laugh, you don't have to ask them.
yes, exactly.
There's nothing to say. You just bury your head in your hands and and know you have to fix it. But you can't find that out sitting in your office at the computer.
No.
Really have to have actors. So this is not a typical the development. It was Wyoming. Then I went home and did rewrites, and then COVID came in, good time to hole up in Studio City and rewrite. And as soon as COVID was starting to abate, I did another reading here in Studio City. Maybe you know the Whitefire Theater over there, and it's right on the border of Sherman Oaks.
Oh, sure.
It's on Ventura.
Oh, sure.
It's a 99 seat black box, and I use that for my local experiments. And I went in there with a bunch of actors and some UCLA a cappella guys, and we tried out there. Better. And then I did one more when COVID was basically done, so people didn't have to be masked. And that one I actually liked. I thought I'd solve the problems and then start submitting it around, and it found its way to Santa Barbara.
So is the Santa Barbara really the premiere of the finished?
That counts as the world premiere.
The world premiere.
It was just developmental.
Oh, congratulations! That's pretty exciting.
Thank you. Yeah.
How are people responding to the music? I'm curious.
They seem very surprised. Even though we made no secret that it's a musical and it's a cappella, I don't think it's really processed until you're in the room, and it's such an exciting thing to have happen because at any second somebody could go out of tune, or it's watching a tightrope act, and I didn't see any loss of attention during the numbers. In fact, there's more of a feeling of leaning forward because this is such a sort of act of daring do to sing this much a cappella. And we had terrific actors who all had a cappella experience and knew how, you adjust if you feel yourself going off or if you feel someone else going off. There's so much nuance involved and so much concentration. And sometimes they even had to dance while they were doing it, which, on Glee, they rarely had to do. So it was a good and surprising and pretty unique element to have the a cappella singing, and appropriate for Oxford.
And it's a romantic comedy, and so when you're fine tuning, you're making sure that you're putting those buttons on the jokes. And having seen it now again, were people laughing where you needed them to laugh? And
at this point, pretty much all the bad jokes were gone, and there were bad jokes because we also had 2 previews before opening night. So fortunately, most of the clunkers had been weeded out by then, and I'm going back up to see it next weekend, and from what I hear, as the actors have been relaxing into it, more comedy, more laughs have emerged, because I think they feel free enough to explore, maybe try different readings. When I'm going to try to get a bigger laugh on this, so I'll do whatever. I'll hit that word harder. I'll look right out at the audience on that word, something. But they make these discoveries as they're realizing how to play this particular kind of comedy, which is not quite sitcom. In some places I tried to do that sort of English drawing room style, and it actually at a you can't do an Alice story without a tea party. So and the actors started calling it the awkward tea party. Alice is sort of trapped by her father into having tea with the young Oxford man that her father has chosen for her. And he sort of put them together. Alice is already in love with Leopold, so it's awkward to say the least. And I did that one kind of drawing room style, and the actors got it to go into a different gear for this one. Some of it's pretty broad. I figured one Wonderland character ought to have an appearance, and I made that the caterpillar. It's he really was, he was the only one with actual useful advice. If you think about it, other
Yeah.
people were saying the most, insane things to her,
Yeah.
but the caterpillar really was helpful in his haughty way. And I thought in her mind, uh, Alice, if she needed advice, could imagine herself going to the caterpillar as a thought experiment. Well, what would the caterpillar say? So I have her do that, and we have Matthew Greenwood, a British actor, playing the caterpillar and doing it in a kind of, the style of one of the knighted great actors of England.
Olivier type.
Perhaps Olivia.
Did you, what are the conflicts with Alice? You brought up Queen Victoria, so that's
Yeah.
pretty clear. What's going on? Are there other conflicts that these two lovers are dealing with?
Well, they both have parental conflicts. I mean, one of the things also factual was Queen Victoria was not a fan of this Oxford project. One thing, it would expose him somehow socially, to anyone, anyone. I mean, they were all pretty much upper class kids at Oxford, but the wrong family, and they could just walk up to him in the classroom. What kind of life would that be for Victoria, and the it's actually a very funny scene on stage, but it actually happened that the negotiation between Leopold and his mother to how he would live there. Certainly not in student housing, God forbid. A rented house. Who needed to be on the staff? Would there be a doctor in residence? And all this, and but talk about over controlling mothers.
Yeah.
The
ultimate helicopter parent.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. She demanded if he had a dinner, that she would approve the menu and the guests.
Oh.
That had to go to her. I know. And so, this is, as you know,
Well,
her writer stumble on
it was Leopold. It was her youngest. I think he
Right.
was the fourth in line. So he probably knew that he had no chance for the throne, and
Yeah.
the youngest being a little bit more rebellious, getting away, and he had some health issues as well.
Well, I mean, that's what made her feel it was valid to have 24-hour medical observation, but he was having none of that. So that's that conflict. Alice had a conflict with her father, who wanted to see her happily married, of course, and knew when he found out about this that this is a delusion, that you're going to marry Prince Leopold. This just cannot be. And he had been, he's got the creme of England right outside his window, these Oxford guys. And he picked one especially for her that was, and this is a character I invented, but I'm sure there were many, and I just made him the captain of the rowing team of Christchurch and a medical student, like a perfect guy, exactly.
Tall, strapping, big shoulders, handsome.
Correct.
Right. Okay, I got it.
Exactly. Played by tall, strapping Sawyer Patterson. when he walked into the audition, well, there it is. And as Leopold says, ruefully healthy. And when he's backing off and bidding out, go with a healthy person who'll have a long life. She's too insanely in love at that point, but he's not. I didn't make him a big dumb jock or a hostile Gaston or something. He's a good guy, and he's exactly who she should have had. One of the reasons I made him a jock was eventually Alice married a professional athlete. So, I thought, oh, well, that probably was on her radar somehow. But she married a famous man. She didn't marry the country
Yeah,
doctor.
that was Reginald Hargraves.
Yeah, yeah. So I think she still wanted that, to maintain this position somehow, that she'd marry someone famous in some way, that she wouldn't suddenly fade from sight because she married an obscure, even wealthy, you know, son of an earl in Northumberland or something. I don't think she was marrying for money. I think she was marrying for I'm sure she loved him, but his uh public image as a famous athlete was certainly an attraction.
I made the connection between Leopold and Alice having a love story and that was real because they both named their first child after each other.
Yeah,
So she had a boy, she named him Leopold. Leopold had a girl, named his daughter Alice.
right, right.
So I thought, okay, that's enough of a connection. There must have
That's
been
what,
there must have been something there. I'm just going to go with that.
yeah, when I got to that, when I was initially just, reading up, I thought, well, the universe just handed me the end of the play. So, well, I didn't deny writing this.
Oh, is that the end of the play?
It's the caterpillar is kind of a wraparound,
Oh,
and
okay.
that so he gives that information, and there's occasionally a little gasp from the audience
Oh,
when
that's
he,
great. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah, because it's hammers home the truth.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
very exciting. Well, I'm going to try and get up and see it. I'm so curious. How long is it running?
Oh, this is the last week,
That's
and
what
the
I thought.
last
End of June.
show will be the June 16th is the last show.
Oh, last show. And what's the hope for next steps?
Well, it's six actors and off Broadway sized, and my last show in New York was off Broadway, Romeo and Bernadette, and it was in a nice little theater on 42nd Street. So I'd like to have the same experience, follow that trajectory to off Broadway in New York.
Oh, well, fingers crossed for
Thank you,
that.
thank
So,
you.
what was your introduction to Alice? Did you read it as a child or the Disney movie or?
I think I read it before the Disney movie. I mean, I was a big reader. Reading the initial books, I don't think was that life-changing because you're reading everything. I remember sort of gravitating to the English children's book when I was really little, like Winnie the Pooh also. Um, but when I was a little older, I found the annotated Alice, which I'm sure you know. And I that was a rabbit hole I dove into because and I've talked to fellow English major nerds about this, and it turns out for a lot of us, that was the first literary criticism that we ever encountered, that we like read a book, you're not reading, I don't know, Leslie Fiedler or something. But this, because we all knew Alice in Wonderland, and oh, well, did you know there's more to it? There's more to a book than you may imagine. And it was so easily readable and digestible, Martin Gardner's book. It was all in the margins.
Oh, I thought it was brilliant. I think everybody who should, you should read it even if you don't care about knowing everything about Alice, because to your point, it's so consumable and digestible.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and it gives you the goods. I mean, it's not holding back. It's just rather than reading even a magazine article about, Alice, literary criticism in general, this was just a way in these little teaspoon-sized bits to take in and be fascinated by this. And oh, that's the Oxford. I mean, there's still stuff in my head when I said the guy at Oxford that looked like the Mad Hatter. For all I know, that could have come from the annotated Alice. And there's been so much since, and somehow that in some way put me on a path towards, English major at college. And other friends of mine, even if they're working in film or something, that book just sort of said, well, there's more than you may think. There's more than you imagine here. Let us explain.
Have you thought about your play as a show movie or
I have, and if it's not Merchant Ivory making it, I don't know if I'm interested. Yeah, because that Victorian look in that period, it has to be so beautiful. And I don't know if that's a Netflix movie, and what else are we gonna have?
they don't make movies like that anymore?
They
There's
really
there's
don't.
barely any movies at all. So
Yeah, yeah. So I don't really see how it could find its way into the media universe that way. I wish, but we just don't live in that world. Maybe there's some English film company, but first, I want to move it down the theatrical path.
yeah, and have that experience you had
Yeah,
with Romeo and Bernadette.
yeah.
What was that about?
Oh, that was another fantasy exploiting an English author.
No
Um,
wonder they hate us American
I
authors.
know, I know. We try so hard. This actually started as a movie script that never got made, but it was essentially Romeo doesn't drink poison at the end of the play. He drinks more of Juliet's sleeping potion, and it puts him out, and he wakes up hundreds of years later and finds a girl who looks a lot like Juliet, but she's an Italian American girl in Verona on a family vacation. And he follows her back to Brooklyn and finds out she's the daughter of a mafia don. And he gets involved with the wrong mafia family, and the whole thing starts again, except the happy ending this time. So yeah, so it was, knocking around, including British companies for a movie, and it didn't happen. And everybody's telling me how good it is and how funny. So I made it into a little musical, 9 actors, and played New York. Really nice reviews.
Oh, it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, we're mixing the cast album right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow, cool.
so, yeah, I'm excited.
Oh, are you musical yourself?
I am, yeah. I started out as when I got into college. I always say this: I had a Ivy League English degree and the ability to play piano. What was going to get me work? And
Right.
I just started playing piano in New York for auditions and bars, and kind of got my feet on the ground and started writing, and on occasion, I'd work on a show like Sesame Street where I could also write songs in addition to doing the script writing. And Alice has 2 songs that I wrote, originals. So I try to keep a toe in the musical world too. I really love it and listen to a lot of music every day.
Sesame Street, when you were writing those scripts, did you just suggest some music, or did they ask you if you could write a song, or was that just part of a song that you put into a script and they went, hey, how did that?
Oh boy, I'm trying to remember now, decades
Well,
ago.
the reason I'm asking is because sometimes, when you're starting out, not everybody knows what your talents are. And
Oh,
I would find that
yeah.
interesting if you were writing and suddenly like, oh, you do music as well. Let's include that into the show.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons they hired me in the first place because they knew that about me.
Okay.
I was writing songs and sketches for off-Broadway reviews, and one of them I wrote for a Sesame Street actor was in it, and she kind of saw what I did. I was writing for her, and she brought me over there and said, he's going to write for me now, right here. And so I think I came in that way. It was, when you were writing a script, usually the writers were lyricists, that, or I should say often. And when you're, in Sesame Street, every sketch, every song has to teach something. So if the thing you wanted to teach, it's good to try new foods. You might do that in the form of a song, or you might do it in the form of a sketch. And on occasion, I would be paired with a composer to set my lyrics. On other occasions, a tune would hit in my head, and I would just submit it. Sometimes they take it, sometimes they reject the music and pass it along. But it was a rare opportunity to be writing songs while writing scripts in television.
Yeah, it sounds like a great experience and a great gig.
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, it was exhausting. It was the hardest script writing I've ever done, because you had to, it had to appeal to preschoolers. It had to appeal to adults. It could be lame. It could be, Teletubbies. This had to be Sesame Street. It had to teach something, and it had to be funny. Well, that's a lot, for a little sketch.
And was that, so you're saying it's difficult to put all that into a little sketch, or were the powers to be who were demanding these things have to all work together, were they difficult, or it's just the actual writing and creating to make it all work, all four elements so they gel?
Yeah, that was that. I mean, everyone agreed this was the Sesame Street formula. This is what made Sesame Street, is that notion that the humor was not going to be lame. It was going to be sharp humor, like any sketch comedy show. And so piling those four, I mean, if you think about it, if you're writing for Saturday Night Live, it just has to be funny.
Yeah.
And, and
adult, pretty much.
Adult-ish. Yeah.
Dumbish.
Yeah, that's a well-known, a well-kept secret, is what age are they writing that for, but or any comedy sketches. But here, to have to do all those things at once in every single sketch, and they'd be tested on kids to see who actually did teach them, that and the comedy stuff. In my time there, the head writer was basically out of television comedy, not education, but over your other shoulder was the Harvard School of Education breathing down and saying, "Oh, that's not teaching. That's not really," So there was so much, and it was a rare. Also, remember, this is public television, so the wages paid are not going to be like network. So if you're a good comedy writer, what are you doing here in PBS? So it was kind of tough to find the exact right kind of writer and to keep them. And, but, if you didn't get paid in wages, you got paid in Emmy awards.
Yes, yes. And you're cutting your teeth on some amazing material, but so you answered that other question about you have the comedy writer and you have the Harvard educated, like those things have to work, and you have two people saying, well, those are not working.
Right.
You have the work itself, and then you have those two talking heads that both have their point of view. So yeah, that sounds very, very demanding.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
How about I saw Mrs. Claus was one of your projects, and two of my friends who wrote There's Something About Mary, I believe they wrote the two of the Claus movies that the Santa Claus movies that Tim Allen was in.
The Santa Claus.
Yeah. Those are not connected, or are they?
They're not. No.
Okay.
This was a TV musical.
A musical? A TV musical.
A musical. With songs by Jerry Herman.
Oh, okay.
Writing for Angela Lansbury. So it was. It still seems to be a perennial online.
Great.
Christmas comes around. I usually get contacted about people enjoying it. We gave it a kind of progressive slant that I still can't believe we got away with. That she came to New York, and it's 1910. We said it in 1910. Jerry's shows tend to be set in the past, and she gets involved with the suffrage movement, women's suffrage. She gets involved with child labor and unions, and we gave it that kind of spin, and the feminists love us for it.
Oh, wow.
It was, an easy way to teach how, how difficult it was for
Yeah.
women to get the vote and how to organize around that. And so I'm pretty proud of that one. I'm glad it's been living on.
Oh, that's great. And do you see many Broadway shows? Anything that you're a fan of that you wish you had written, or
when I get to New York, there's never enough time. The last thing I saw was this production running of Merrily Roll Along Sondheim's show, which I had tremendous affection for. I saw when I was young, when it first opened in the 80s, and finally people are making it work, and it's a hit now with Daniel Radcliffe. And I love that. And I also saw Sondheim's new one, his posthumous show, Here We Are. Because, to be involved in musical theater at all is to be, worshiping at the feet of Sondheim. And
indeed.
I'm no exception. So, yeah, I would say that's sort of the number one stuff. When whatever might be playing of his, I'll make a special effort.
Do people come to you to talk about writing a book for an idea, or do you generate most of your ideas and work on those?
I guess it works both ways. I think I'm trying to think what in theater people have come to me that was actually finally produced. There's so much of it. If I'm doing it myself, I have my steps. I know what to do, and it can be very painstaking and slow. And I'm not sure collaborators can put up with that. And people do come to me, and I'd say 50% of them I want to work on, 50% I don't for whatever reason, that I've done something like that before, or I just don't see how it's ever going to get done. But it's always flattering when someone comes to you and invites you. But I would say of the shows I've had produced, they've all been originated by me.
Because theater is much like the movie business or television. I mean, there is a lot of plays being developed or musicals being developed that we never get to see because it's really difficult to get them up on their feet and for all the elements to come together. And I think one of the things that's really underrated is the book writer. I mean, everybody talks,
yes.
You know what I mean? I mean, the lyricist and the composer, okay. But to get that book right, to make, a musical, be able to work is really hard. And there's not that, I don't know, there's not a lot of people that are, you just go, oh yeah, those three people I'll get for the book. I don't know, I just find it interesting that
it is, because it's no different from, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 screenwriting or TV writing. It's the same skills, you're plugging songs in. But if you have those skills, and if you find yourself with those skills at an early age, wouldn't you jump into TV? I mean, I did. You need to make a living.
Yeah, because they don't pay very much.
Oh, the theater. Yeah, well, as they say, you can make a killing, but you can't make a living.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if you've done Wicked, you're good.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's only 1 or 2 per decade. And yet there's so many other positives about it. And But if you're starting out and you really do need the paycheck, you really can't do theater. It's the payoff is after opening. There's not really, unless you were lucky enough to be commissioned, which you won't be at an early age. You have to be working, it could be years on a project and then get to opening night and hope for the best, that maybe now I'll get paid.
Wow.
Whereas, in TV and film, there's a union, of which I'm a proud member, and the union makes sure, like any union, that you get paid at this pay rate. So, on the other hand, you're selling your copyright, you're losing control on union jobs, and you kind of have no say. Whereas you own the copyright in theater, and you have the final word on casting, on if it is, does this line stay in, does it go out? That's all up to the playwright.
And the same with the novelist. And so part of my, interest in writing was born out of losing copyright, losing control, and being frustrated and saying, well, I'd like to be the author from beginning to end and play in my own sandbox. Not that those could always pay enough to pay bills and so forth, but creatively, it's so fulfilling.
Well, and that's so it. There's other rewards, the union jobs for money, the theater and novel jobs for art.
Yeah. So if you were a character from Alice in Wonderland and we're going to a masquerade party, who would you be and why?
Oh, there's a good, this is the annotated Alice still in my head. But it's the White Knight.
White Knight.
Because there's inventiveness and kindliness about him. The caterpillar was helpful, but had that horrible attitude, which I exploit.
Right. And he's stoned a lot.
Well, if only. Maybe it would take that horrible, haughty Oxford edge off him, But he also seemed, and I wrote him this way and said to the actor, the most Oxfordian of any of the characters in Alice in Wonderland. That attitude, that who are you, that superiority is so Oxford. Whereupon the White Knight was humble and kind, completely inept, not helpful at all to Alice, but at least didn't, she didn't end up in an ocean of salt water or, having her head stretched to the ceiling. At least he was kind. And I think that attitude is coming over decades from the annotated Alice, that was pointed out there. And I somehow never forgot that about him. I also remember, this is in there, that there was a speculation that was the Lewis Carroll self-portrait, was the White Knight, because you can't imagine him as any of the other characters.
Right.
He wasn't, and the White Knight is slightly ridiculous, and that might be how Dodgson felt with his speech impediment,
with his stutter, yeah.
Yeah, that he was a figure of ridicule. He was probably was ridicule because the way kids talk about their teachers,
Right. Riding in on the horse also, puts him above everybody. So that's got to feel good.
Yeah, they're just it's a quiet episode, compared to beheadings and screamings and croquet. I don't know, that was always a place in the books where I felt at home or something, at peace in that episode.
Very good answer.
Oh, thank you. Coming from an expert.
Well, I read in an interview that somebody asked you if you were an expert on Alice in Wonderland or Lewis Carroll, and you said you weren't an expert, but you did so much research. And I did the same thing. I went to Oxford and spent 6 months there and kind of
Oh,
did.
months. Great. Good for you.
Oh, it was so much fun, and did some writing.
Wasn't it? I mean, I have Leopold at one point. This is the one place where he's expressing anything I felt, but I have him in a speech where he says, Oxford is Wonderland. You don't realize it. You've been living here so long.
Yeah.
And that's just how I felt. I mean, and I've been to places in Europe before, it's not like, oh, my first old European place. Nothing it was ever like Oxford to me. I mean, I was truly walking around in awe that whenever you looked up, or when my guide showed me the actual deanery, and this all somehow was real. I just can't compare it to any other place I've been, and I would love to spend months there. I keep looking at adult education things about thinking, oh, I could do that. I could sign on to that. I'd like to learn Shakespeare.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan. I love the British Museum, and then and then being in Oxford, and just the people, and it feels like its own wonderland. And well, it's been a real pleasure and speaking with you, Mark.
Good. Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. So enjoy the afternoon. I think the sun's come out.
I hope so. Oh, look, it's out. It's out. Okay, take
All right.
care.
Thanks so much, Mark. Cheers.